My desk faced the window that looked out over the parking lot. Not the city view, not the lake, the parking lot. I used to think it was a coincidence. After 5 years, I knew it wasn't. I was the one who built the client portfolio at Hargrove and Lind. Not technically, not on paper, not according to the org chart that my boss kept laminated on his office wall. But everyone who actually did the work knew. The clients knew. The junior associates knew. Even the receptionist, Denise, who had been there longer than anyone and had seen 3 full cycles of people come and leave. Even she knew. My boss's name was Richard. He had the handshake of a man who had practiced it in a mirror. He wore the same 3 blazers on rotation and laughed a little too loudly at his own jokes in client dinners. He was the kind of man who said we when things went well and she when they didn't. I had joined Hargrove and Lind at 31, fresh off a brutal 2 years at a bigger firm downtown, where I had learned, the hard way, that being good at your job and being rewarded for it are 2 entirely separate conversations. I told myself Hargrove and Lind was different. It was smaller, more personal. Richard had told me during my interview that this was a place where the people who do the work are the people who get the credit. I wrote that down in my notebook that night. I underlined it. I don't know why I'm still embarrassed about that. Within 18 months, I had turned our mid-market healthcare division from the weakest department in the firm into the one that Richard used in board presentations. I restructured how we handled renewals. I built a compliance tracking system from scratch because the one we had was a spreadsheet from 2014 that 3 different people had renamed and nobody fully understood. I brought in 2 new accounts on my own. One of them a regional hospital network out of Ohio called Meridian Health Partners that at the time represented just under $4 million in annual contract value. By year 3, Meridian was at $6.2 million. By year 4, they were at $8 million and expanding. I knew every person on their internal team by name. I knew that their VP of operations, a woman named Carol, drank her coffee black and always needed the agenda emailed the night before because she had 3 kids and mornings were chaos. I knew that their CFO got nervous about anything over a certain threshold and needed the risk language softened but still accurate. I knew the rhythm of their fiscal year better than some of their own people did. Richard knew their contract dollar amount and not much else. That was fine. I didn't need credit. I needed the work to be good, and I thought, to be compensated fairly for it. In January of my 5th year, I sat down with Richard for what he called a strategic alignment meeting, which was his way of doing performance reviews without calling them performance reviews because he claimed the word made people defensive. He told me I was critical to the firm's success. He told me the healthcare division's numbers were exceptional. He smiled the way he smiled at client dinners and told me that my compensation package would reflect my contributions in the upcoming cycle. I asked him directly what that meant. He said he'd have something to me by Q2. Q2 came, then Q3. I sent follow-up emails with subject lines that started friendly and got progressively less so. I had one meeting that he rescheduled twice and then ended after 11 minutes because he said he had a call. I got a 2% cost of living adjustment in my October paycheck and a Starbucks gift card in an envelope on my desk with a post-it that said, "Great work this year. R. $50. I sat with the gift card in my hand for a long time. The Meridian contract that year had just renewed at $8.4 million. I had personally negotiated the renewal. I had flown to Columbus twice on my own time. Once in February, when there was a snowstorm and my flight was delayed 4 hours, and I sat in O'Hare eating a $6 granola bar and answering client emails on my phone. Nobody asked me to do that. I did it because the work mattered and because I believed stupidly, faithfully, that the work would speak for itself. $50. I put the gift card in my desk drawer and I closed it very gently, the way you close a door when you don't want anyone to hear you leave. I didn't say anything to Richard. I didn't send an angry email. I didn't complain to HR. I had been in the industry long enough to know that the woman who complains is never the woman who wins. Instead, I started paying attention differently. I started noticing things I had filed away and not examined. The way Richard had introduced me at the last industry conference. And this is one of our team members, when I had been the one who had prepared his entire keynote presentation. The way my name appeared on internal memos but not on the client-facing materials. The way the new junior hire, a 26-year-old named Brett, who had been there for 8 months and could not have found Meridian on a map, had just been given the title of senior associate while I was still technically a manager, despite running a division that generated more revenue than 2 other departments combined. I'm not a person who acts on impulse. I'm a person who makes plans. So I made one. The first thing I did was call my attorney. Her name is Sandra, and she's exactly the kind of woman you want in your corner. Quiet, thorough, and absolutely unbothered by men who talk too much. I walked her through my 5 years at Hargrove and Lind. I walked her through the numbers, the emails, the documentation I had kept. Because I have always kept documentation. Not because I expected to need it, but because I'm the kind of person who saves receipts. Sandra listened. She asked a few questions, then she said, "You have more than you think you do?" I asked her what I should do. She said, "Nothing yet. Just keep the record clean." The second thing I did was have lunch with Carol. Carol from Meridian. Carol who drank her coffee black and needed the agenda the night before. We had been having quarterly lunches for 3 years, usually at a Thai place near her office in the Loop that she liked because it was quiet enough to hear yourself think. This time, I asked if she wanted to try somewhere new. There was a new place in River North that had just opened. She said, sure. We talked about her kids. We talked about the hospital network's expansion into southern Indiana. We talked about a compliance issue they'd been having with one of their vendors that had nothing to do with us, but that she wanted my opinion on anyway because, she said, you always know how to think about these things. I listened. I helped. That was what I always did. And then, carefully, the way you turn a key in a lock. You don't want to make noise. I asked her how satisfied Meridian was with the service they were receiving. She paused. She put her fork down. Honestly, she said. Honestly. She told me that their internal team had been talking, that the past 2 quarters had felt less attentive, that some of the reports had come back with errors that she'd had to flag, that she had put in a request 3 weeks ago for a revised compliance summary and had not received it. I had not been copied on that request. I had not known about it. I made a note on my phone under the table. I told Carol that I was sorry she'd had that experience. I told her I would personally make sure the summary was on her desk by end of week. And then I told her, not as a pitch, not as a sales move, but as a genuine conversation between 2 people who had worked closely together for years, that I had been thinking about some changes in my own professional life. She looked at me, really looked. What kind of changes? She said. I told her. I was in the early stages of thinking about something of my own. A boutique advisory practice, healthcare compliance focus, nothing concrete yet. She nodded slowly. Keep me posted, she said. That was all she said. But Carol was a woman who chose her words carefully, and keep me posted from Carol meant more than a paragraph from someone else. Over the next 4 months, I did what I had always done. I did my job and I did it well. I answered every email. I delivered every report. I made sure that every client touchpoint I was responsible for was handled with exactly the level of care it always had been. I did not let anything slip. I did not give Richard or anyone else a single thing to point to. But in the margins of my regular work, I was building something else. I found office space, a small suite in a shared building in the West Loop, reasonable rent month to month to start. I registered the LLC. I filed the paperwork. I opened a business account. I put together a service deck and a pricing structure, and I had Sandra review every document before I touched it. I reached out to 2 former colleagues who I trusted completely. A woman named Grace, who had been in healthcare compliance for 12 years and left her last firm because they kept promising her a partnership track that never materialized. And a man named Daniel, who was one of the most meticulous analysts I had ever worked with and who had told me 6 months earlier, over drinks, that he was running out of reasons to stay where he was. I told them both what I was building. I told them I wanted them to be part of it. Grace said yes in about 45 seconds. Daniel took a week. Then he said yes. I did not tell anyone at Hargrove and Lind. I did not put anything on LinkedIn. I did not mention it to my office neighbor or to Denise at reception, even though Denise had covered for me more times than I could count. And I genuinely liked her. I kept the professional and the personal completely separate. In month 3 of my planning, Carol called me directly, not on the firm line, on my cell, which she had because we had exchanged numbers years ago for exactly the kind of after-hours urgency that comes with managing a large account. She told me that Meridian's contract was up for renewal in 90 days. She told me that their board had been discussing their service relationships. And then she said something that I have thought about many times since. She said, "We don't just want a firm. We want the person who understands us. You understand us." I was standing in my kitchen when she said this. I had a mug of tea in my hand. I set it down. I told her I understood. I told her I would be in touch within the week. I called Sandra that night. Sandra said, "How soon can you be ready?" I said, 30 days. She said, "Make it 25. The letter of resignation took me a long time to write. Not because I struggled to find the words, but because I wanted to find exactly the right ones. Not angry, not gloating, not long. I have seen resignation letters that were basically novels, full of old grievances dressed up as professional feedback. That was not what I wanted. I wrote 3 paragraphs. The first thanked Hargrove and Lind for the opportunity. The second stated my last day. The third said I wished the firm continued success. I sent it on a Tuesday morning at 9 o'clock. At 9:43, my access to the firm's internal systems was revoked. Not at end of day, not after a transition period. 43 minutes after I submitted a professional, gracious, 3-paragraph resignation letter, my login credentials stopped working. I found this out because I tried to send a routine client email and got an error message. I tried again, same thing. I opened a browser and tried to log into the client portal. Locked. I sat at my desk, the one facing the parking lot. and I almost laughed. I had been planning my exit for 4 months. I had documented everything I was legally entitled to have. Every contact, every note that was mine, every piece of work product that I had created and that Sandra had confirmed I had the right to retain. I had already transitioned everything I needed to transition. The 43-minute lockout didn't hurt me. It just told me everything I needed to know about what kind of place I was leaving. I cleared my personal items into a tote bag I had brought for exactly this purpose: my desk plant, a framed photo, a notepad. I left the Starbucks gift card in the drawer because I had never spent it, and I wasn't going to start now. I walked past Richard's office on my way out. His door was open. He was on the phone, and he looked up when I passed. And there was something in his expression. Not surprise exactly, more like a calculation. And I smiled at him the same way I had smiled on the day I walked in for my interview 5 years ago. I left without stopping. Meridian Health Partners signed with my firm, which I had named Linden Advisory Group, 11 days before my last official day at Hargrove and Lind. Their contract value in the first year, $8.6 million. I want to be honest about what that moment felt like, because I think people expect it to feel like a movie, some big dramatic rush, balloons and champagne, and a slow motion walk away from an explosion. It wasn't like that. I was sitting at my new desk in the West Loop office. Grace was across from me. Daniel was on a call in the other room. Carol had just sent a signed copy of our service agreement via DocuSign, and my phone had given me the little notification sound it makes when something comes through. I read the email. I read it again. And then I put my phone face down on the desk and I sat there for a while. It felt like exhaling after holding your breath for 4 months. It felt like finally being in a room where the windows face the right direction. Hargrove and Lind found out through their renewal outreach process, which was automated. A system-generated renewal notice went out to Meridian's procurement office. Procurement sent back a standard response that they had transitioned to a new advisory relationship. Nobody flagged it as unusual because nobody had thought to watch for it. I later heard from someone still at the firm that Richard found out on a Thursday that he had to call an emergency department meeting. That he said, and this was relayed to me secondhand, so I hold it loosely, that certain departures create temporary disruptions. Temporary. The Meridian account had represented, depending on the year, between 22 and 28% of the healthcare division's total revenue. That's not a disruption. That's a structural shift. I did not attend whatever meeting or debrief or postmortem they had. I was not invited and would not have gone if I had been. I had moved on, completely and without drama, in the direction of the thing I had actually wanted to build. In the months that followed, 2 other accounts that I had managed, smaller than Meridian but significant, also reached out to me directly without any solicitation from my end, asking if Linden Advisory was accepting new clients. I told them we were. Grace became the firm's compliance director. Daniel built out our analytics function. We hired a 4th person by spring, a young woman named Priya, who reminded me of myself 10 years ago, except sharper and less patient with nonsense, which I considered an upgrade. I think about Richard sometimes, not with anger, or not mostly with anger, more with a kind of clarity that I couldn't have had while I was still inside it. He was not an unusual person. He was a very common kind of manager, The kind who is threatened by competence he can't fully control, and who mistakes the map for the territory, who looks at a client relationship built on trust and years of careful attention and sees a contract number, a line item, something transferable and interchangeable. He could not see that the relationship was the work, that the work was the relationship, that when I left, the work left with me, because it had always lived in the understanding between me and the people I served, not in the firm's letterhead. He found that out eventually. I hope, in whatever way is useful to him, that he learned something from it. For my part, I learned something too. And I'll tell you what it is because I think it's the thing people don't always say out loud. The hardest part was not the planning. The planning was actually the clearest headed I had felt in years. Every day had a purpose and a direction, and I knew exactly what I was building toward. The hardest part was the months before I started planning, the months when I was still handing in the $50 gift card version of myself and waiting for someone else to decide what I was worth. The moment I stopped waiting was the moment everything changed. Not because of the revenge, not because of the $8.6 million contract or the West Loop office or any of the specific circumstances that followed, but because I had finally decided that my career, the actual shape and direction and value of my career, was mine to determine. I had always known how to do the work. I just had to learn that knowing your work is not enough. You have to know yourself well enough to walk out of rooms that don't deserve you, even if the room has a parking lot view. Especially then, I've thought about what to call what happened between me and Hargrove and Lind. Betrayal sounds too dramatic for something that was really just indifference. And indifference, I've learned, is its own kind of cruelty. It doesn't announce itself. It just slowly teaches you that you are replaceable, that your effort has a ceiling, that the people at the top of the room have already decided what you're worth, and they'd prefer you not ask questions about it. Richard never hated me. I want to be clear about that because I think it matters. He just never fully saw me. And for a long time, I mistook being necessary for being valued. Those are not the same thing. You can be the load-bearing wall of an entire structure and still be the last one anyone thinks to thank when the building is standing. What I know now is that the version of me who sat at that parking lot view desk for 5 years, doing exceptional work, sending polite follow-up emails, accepting a $50 gift card with a quiet smile, that version of me was not weak. She was patient, and patience is not a flaw. But patience has a point at which it stops being a virtue and starts being a habit you've mistaken for peace. I reached that point when I held that gift card in my hand and understood, finally, that no one was coming to correct the situation. That if I wanted something different, I was going to have to build it myself. That's the thing about integrity. Real integrity. Not the performative kind people talk about in LinkedIn posts. Real integrity means you keep doing excellent work even when the room isn't watching, even when the credit goes somewhere else. Even when the renewal notice goes out under someone else's name. You do it because the work is yours and the standard is yours. And those things don't belong to any firm or any boss who rotates 3 blazers and forgets your salary review for 3 consecutive quarters. And then, because actions accumulate, because nothing disappears, that integrity becomes the thing that Carol trusts, that Grace and Daniel follow, that Meridian signs their name next to. The work I did in the years before I left was not wasted. It was the foundation of everything I built after. Richard thought the relationship lived in his firm's letterhead. It lived in every phone call I made from a delayed flight, every agenda I emailed the night before, every time I showed up fully when I didn't have to. That's the cause. The effect was $8.6 million dollars and a West Loop office with windows that face the right direction. I'm not telling this story because I want anyone to go start a company or walk out of a job tomorrow. That's not the point. The point is smaller and more important than that. The point is, know what your work is actually worth and don't let the silence of someone who won't tell you convince you it's worth less. The point is that how you treat people, Carol, Grace, Daniel, Denise at the front desk, that is not separate from your strategy. That is your strategy. The point is that the clearest headed I ever felt in my professional life was the 4 months I spent building something real, quietly, without anyone's permission. You don't need permission to know your worth. You just need the honesty to stop waiting for someone else to assign it to you.